With 6 different Game 7s, 11 total series that went the full distance, dominating performances from teams outside of North America or Europe, and some of the most intense games that we've ever seen, I think it's fair to say that the Spring Major was the most exciting RLCS LAN ever. But I should probably say the most exciting LAN so far, because with the World Championship coming up in just 1 month, we'll definitely be seeing the biggest LAN ever, in terms of prize pool, the number of teams, and the overall stakes, with this one event being the climax of nearly a year's worth of work for all the teams there. But before we get there, let's take a step back and look at some of the most interesting teams from the Spring Major, because there were plenty of surprises, both good and bad. Plus, I've been gone for a little while, so it's time for me to get some thoughts out there. So with that said, let's get into it. I think that Team Falcons might be the single team that I learned the most about coming out of this tournament, mostly because of the lack of usable information that there was on them before. Sure, they played in 9 regionals and in the Fall Major, but in those 9 regionals, they won every single one and lost only 3 series to other Middle Eastern teams the entire season. Plus, every time they lost a series, they'd come back in the grand finals to dominate the team that beat them before. While you can still learn about them from seeing them beat these teams that they're clearly way better than, you can really only see a team's true colors when they're matched up against an opponent that's either at or above their skill level. And in the Falcons' case, the Middle East doesn't quite have that. Yet. Then in the Fall Major, the only other competition where they played against opponents that were at or above their skill level, they didn't even have their starting roster, which in turn completely changed the team's playstyle. But now we've finally seen their starting roster against other world-class teams, and they prove that they deserve to be right there alongside them. There's obviously a lot to love about this team, but if there was one thing that I had to pick that stood out the most, it would have to be Khaled and how good he is at defense and controlling possession. I mentioned in one of my videos before about how possession is so fluid in Rocket League, and because of that, it can be hard to determine who actually has possession sometimes. Because someone may be controlling the ball 1 second, but a lot of the time, all it takes is one person charging in for a 50 to take the ball away from them and send it into a random area where nobody has possession anymore. So really, possession is so fluid because of how easy it can be to dispossess somebody. But Khaled might be the clearest exception to this rule that we've ever seen, because when he has the ball, he's not going to let you take it away so easily. He's a master of getting in perfect position for 50s and getting the right touches on the ball, and generally doing whatever it takes to ensure that he has possession of the ball for as long as he wants to. He's always under control, never panics, and hardly ever makes a wrong decision when he has possession. So, this is going to seem kind of random, but here's a spoiler warning for the anime Haikyu. Skip to the time shown on screen now if you haven't seen that and you don't want to know what happens. Also, what are you waiting for? Go watch Haikyu. So this story is about volleyball, and the main team is Karasuno. And the thing that they're known for more than anything else is speed and offensive aggression. They would surprise and overwhelm teams with that speed in order to rack up the points and eventually take the win. But in their match against Narizaki in the national tournament, that speed starts to work against them. Because Narizaki is the best team that they've faced so far, and they're able to keep up with their speed. So Karasuno is struggling to break through their defense. And as a response, they try to go faster and faster, hoping to get their edge back. But as their speed increases, their play gets sloppier, and they're in danger of losing the game because of it. Sandrock Gaming was the exact same way when they first came onto the Rocket League scene. When they started appearing in community tournaments in 2020, Sandrock was known for their incredible speed, which would take teams by surprise and was the basis of their offensive attack. And in their first tournament against top-level teams, the European Invitational back in March 2020, this speed worked out perfectly for them, and they started beating the top teams in Europe, including Dignitas and Vitality. But then, in the grand finals, they went against Team Singularity, who they had already faced and beaten earlier in the tournament. But this time around, Singularity wasn't surprised by Sandrock's speed anymore, and they started winning the series as a result. To try to fight back, Sandrock tried to go even faster in the grand finals than they had in the rest of the tournament. But this increase in speed only made them play sloppier, and they go on to lose 5 straight games in those grand finals. Not even talked about Sandrock's speed and how they had to get used to it in order to win.
They don't really play like any other RLCS team. They're like a lot quicker and they make decisions faster. They play like impulsively. So at first that kind of caught me off guard because usually I have time to do things and do their flashy stuff, but they pressure me pretty quickly. So as soon as I got used to it, it felt easier to play.
In Haikyu, this speed and sloppiness was going to make Karasuno lose too. But the main character, Shoyo, makes a touch on the ball that forces everyone to slow down. He passes the ball high up in the air, making it float there for a long time. This gives his teammates a chance to catch their breath, take it easy for a second, and then think about their next move instead of just blindly running to the next spot. And this gives them the boost they need to eventually win the match. And this play that Shoyo made to slow down the game and rein in his teammates is something that Khaled does all the time. But instead of popping the ball high in the air like Shoyo, all Khaled does is hit it softly enough for him to stay close to it and maintain possession, while also slowing down the pace of the game in general. So now, Falcons don't play nearly as fast as they used to. And a big reason for that is Khaled always taking his time whenever he can, and making sure that he and his teammates are always under control, using the time that he buys to think about where they should be, and then get there. And like they said in Haikyu, speed is a powerful weapon, and it looks really cool, but it's not invincible. And these two probably know that better than anybody else. But in addition to his possession plays, Khaled's calmness serves him well on defense too, especially considering how much time he spends back there, and that so many of his touches come in the defensive third of the field. Ahmad's offensive aggression and ability is well known at this point, especially now that he's been named offensive MVP for the Spring Major. And TRK is generally flying all over the field, making plays and filling gaps everywhere, and filling in the space between the two extremes of Ahmad's offense and Khaled's defense. Ahmad and TRK are only able to play this way because of the faith that they're able to have in Khaled as he holds down their defense with his calm confidence on the back line. After a clear from Daniel, Khaled has a free touch on the ball with plenty of space, so he plays the ball into the corner, letting him collect the 100 boost and giving him time to figure out what he wants to do next. He turns upfield slightly after grabbing that boost, getting him in a position to follow up quickly on the ball if it bounces up off the wall or if it bounces slightly upfield off the corner. But the problem is, the ball doesn't do either of these things, and instead goes off the sidewall and heads straight for his net. So now he needs to go into reverse to touch the ball, and Arsenal is closing in on him to make it even more difficult. You might see a lot of players in the situation panic and try to backflip into the ball in a desperate attempt to try to clear as quickly as possible. But Khaled instead calmly uses a single jump to pop the ball over Arsenal and get his car over him as well, which is important because as we can see from Arsenal's POV, he turned off ball camera before the challenge and was already looking to get a bump in. But the job isn't done yet because now Khaled has to deal with Redos, who's coming in for the challenge. He turns his car around to face the ball and feathers his boost to keep his elevation and get a bit closer to the ball. Then right before Redos dives in, Khaled uses the flip to get the ball away from Redos. And while Redos does get the bump, at this point Khaled has gone from a very awkward position in defense to keeping the ball away from two opponents by himself and getting the ball to a much safer position. And after TRK is pushed out of the way, he even swoops around to get the 50 on Daniel's touch. A few seconds later, and Khaled is once again in a similar position, taking a touch in the back corner with Arsenal bearing down on him. But while Arsenal once again turns off ball cam and rotates through looking for the bump, Khaled gets a soft touch over him, while keeping it far away enough from Redos, who now has no chance of contesting Khaled's next touch. Khaled sees Ahmad wide open downfield and sends the ball right to him, and Ahmad takes his time with his touch and knocks the ball home, scoring the goal for Sandrock. So while Ahmad and TRK get a lot of praise for Falcons' success, don't forget about all the work that Khaled is doing behind them too, because this team wouldn't even be close to the same without him. I don't like to talk down on teams in my videos, and I especially don't like talking down on individual players. Most of these players are really young, and they have enough pressure on their shoulders already without random YouTube analysts calling them out after a bad performance. But sometimes you just have to tell it how it is. And Team BDS just had the worst choke that we've ever seen at an RLCS LAN. With the expectations they had going into the tournament, and taking 2 straight losses to teams from smaller regions, that might have been bad enough on its own to be considered the worst LAN performance ever. But then when you take into account the fact that they got swept in both of these series, being dominated from start to finish, I don't see how any LAN performance can come close to this as the most disappointing. And the worst thing about it is that a lot of the mistakes that they made were very uncharacteristic for them, and they really never should have happened in the first place. The easiest mistakes to point out were the missed touches on what should have been routine clears. In the Team Secret series alone, they had 5 missed clears that gave their opponent an easy goal. And while these clears varied in difficulty, they were all reachable. And you can't afford to miss these hits if you want success at the top level. And to make it even worse, Seiko was responsible for 4 of these missed clears against Team Secret, and he just looked really shaky and unreliable on defense for the entire tournament. We've never seen misses this bad this often from Seiko. I'm not sure if he was dealing with nerves from the heightened expectations of being on this great team, but regardless of what the issue was, I hope that he and BDS get them sorted out before the World Championship, because that event is going to put way more pressure on the players than this one did. BDS have the talent to win the World Championship, so I hope they're able to let that talent shine through. These mechanical mistakes on their own would have been bad enough to kill the defense, but their defensive mistakes went beyond just missing the ball. They were also caught out of position on multiple occasions, leading to free transition goals for their opponents. If you've seen any videos where I talk about BDS, then you've heard me say that Extra is an excellent midfield defender, which is still as true now as it ever was. But in this tournament, there were a lot of times when Extra was the farthest man back in the rotation. And usually when this happens, it's not that big of a problem, because most times when we see Extra as the last man back, he's shadowing and slowing down the opponent's play, giving Monkey Moon enough time to rotate back in goal to make saves. But the big problem in the Spring Major was that a lot of the times when Extra was farthest back, Monkey Moon wouldn't be in a good spot to rotate back in time. So instead of Extra just buying time for his teammates, he would instead be left to fend for himself in goal. and there were a few times when he just couldn't hold on. And for a lot of these plays, it's not fair to give Extra all the blame. He would just be in a really bad spot against a good player, and when that happens, goals are going to be scored. In this play, after the Pioneers don't convert on offense, the ball bounces off Seiko, who gets enough space for a clear through the air. And with Scrub and Banana Head taking wide rotations back to defense, and Lockie playing really passively in the middle of the field, Seiko has plenty of space to make whatever play he wants. He could take the ball down to the ground and start a regular dribble to beat Lockie, or with his teammates so close by in support, he could even go to the ground and leave the ball entirely and drive out ahead to look for some bumps, clearing the way for his teammates. But instead of doing any of that, he goes for a flip reset, which is often used to beat a challenging defender, but here, there is no challenging defender. So this play isn't really all that helpful. And to make things worse, he doesn't even connect on the flip reset, going under and off to the right of the ball. This sends the ball right back to Lockie, and to try to make sure their possession doesn't go to waste, Monkey dives in trying to win the ball back. But Lockie calmly tips it over him, and Monkey goes flying by. So now we're stuck in the spot of Extra needing to hold down the fort on his own, with Lockie in solid control of the play. He takes to the sky, and Extra follows him up there to try to stop the aerial shot. Lockie gets the flip reset, and to avoid Extra, he doesn't use it until he hits the ground, where he wave dashes into the ball, after Extra's in an even more awkward spot after floating in the air. The shot goes off the crossbar, but Scrub is able to read the bounce, and he gets to the ball before Seiko, scoring the goal. So even though Extra was the man responsible for guarding the net when the Pioneers scored, with both of his teammates taking themselves out of the play and forcing Extra to save the day on his own, I don't think Extra can take too much of the blame for this. Although with that said, there were plenty of times when Extra was the last man back, and he would make the wrong decision that would directly lead to a goal, so he still deserves some blame for BDS's bad showing. And their struggles extended to the offensive side of the ball too, because they didn't have the efficient finishing that we've come to expect from them, despite creating a good number of chances. And Seiko is probably the main offender here too, because he was looking pretty rough. He had a lot of scoring chances but didn't score nearly enough of them, and poor decision making was a big reason for that. Here we have a good scoring chance for BDS, with Seiko getting space on the ball after the failed clear from Pioneers. He could do multiple things here. He could take a direct shot, but with Scrub's positioning in net, it would be pretty hard to get the ball by him. There's no room near post to get the ball behind him, and he's in a good spot to react to any shot that goes far post. A perfect shot could potentially score with enough power, but I wouldn't like the odds. Next, he could go for a double tap. With Scrub down on the ground, the back wall above the net is clear. Plus, Seiko has more than enough boost, and we all know that he has the mechanical ability to pull this off. So I think this would be a pretty good choice. And finally, there's the option that I like the most, which is simply passing the ball off to the right and letting Extra take the shot. A shot from Seiko here probably gets saved, but a shot from Extra off a good pass, coming from right in the middle of the field at point blank range, that's nearly unsavable. But with all of these choices to pick from, Seiko's first touch goes into the post, and bounces into one of the few spots that would allow Scrub to get to the next touch before Seiko, so he gets the clear, and BDS doesn't score. The major was defined by mechanical and mental mistakes for BDS, and if they want to have any chance in the World Championship, they're going to need to get these sorted out. Yan is the best player outside of North America and Europe that we've ever seen. It's not like he's way ahead of the competition for this title. Ahmad's close, TRK is even closer, and of course you have to give credit to the OCE legend Drippe when discussing this title as well. But in terms of individual performance, I don't think there's ever been a player from the smaller regions who has played this well compared to his competition at the time. In my last video, I talked about how Yan was passing at a high level and always finding the perfect spot and opportunity to exploit defenders and find his teammate in scoring chances, while both he and his teammates methodically worked their way up the field. This style worked out really well for them, helping them get to a top 6 finish, the highest ever at an international competition for a South American team. But I guess Yan got bored of passing all the time, and he decided to become one of the best scorers now instead. And he did it so well that he not only led his team, but led the entire event in goals per game at 1.36. In fact, this was the second highest ever goals per game that we've seen at any RLCS LAN, behind only Dapper at the Season 3 World Championship. And I know that one of their series was against Gladiators, who they were much better than and kinda ran up the score against. So I decided to see what his average was in that series, so I could leave an asterisk saying how much of his goals were boosted by stat padding against them. But to my surprise, he averaged only 1 goal per game in that series, while his teammates racked up the goals instead. So this means that his goals per game average against all the other teams they played, who are legitimately world class, is even higher. And it also means that an asterisk isn't needed. So now, Yan has shown the ability to be a top tier passer, and quite literally a legendary scorer. And I should mention that he was actually both at the same time in the Spring Major. He has always shown a great ability to make fantastic plays in the air, which we saw plenty of in this major as well, but he also showed more of a natural shooting instinct, always appearing in the perfect spot to take advantage of the passes that he'd get from his teammates. And And speaking of his teammates, Yan wasn't the only one to go through a role reversal between this major and the last. Haikyu went from having the second fewest assists per game in the Winter Major to having the most in the Spring Major. So he went from being the one benefiting from all the setups to creating the setups himself. He still showed an incredibly grounded playstyle, focusing on getting one solid touch on the ball to get it to where it needed to go. But this time around, he used those solid touches to find great passes more often instead of just hitting great shots, which of course he can still do. And to be honest, a lot of the assists that he got came from a shot that he took that his teammate had to follow up on. So his great shooting ability made him an even better passer. We can see Yan and Haikju's new tendencies shown off in this play. After they took a few shots on goal and started building pressure, Furia has Karmine Corp stuck in their half, trying to clear the ball. Astro has possession, but he has no boost to do anything with it after using all of it on defense, and Haikju stealing their corner. So he slowly walks it out and prepares for the 50. Meanwhile, Haikju turns around and gets in position for the 50 himself, but instead of taking it immediately, he sits right in front of Astro to get in the way of his clear. After taking their corner, Haikju knows that Astro's probably low on boost, so instead of forcing a 50 and sending the ball into a potentially random position, he instead chooses to keep the play in this area, since there's not really anything Astro can do about it. Meanwhile, Yan rotated back to the side boost while waiting to see what was going to happen, and when he saw how slowly the ball and both Astro and Haikju were moving, he quickly closes the distance. With everything moving so slow, the resulting touch on the ball won't go very far, unless there's a freak pinch or something. So if Yan wants to be next to follow up, he'll need to be waiting close by. So he approaches the play, and by the time the 50 does happen, as expected, it stays in the area, and Yan is the first one to it. With his angle to the goal being so tight, and two defenders in the area, there aren't many options here. But Yan finds a tiny bit of space on the back wall, in front of Itachi and behind Nali. Yan sends it perfectly into that area, and keeps it out of the reach of both Karmine players. Then he quickly follows up, getting the second touch, and scoring the goal. And every time I talk about Furia, I spend a lot of time talking about Yan and Haikju, but not nearly as much on card. But don't take that as a sign that he isn't as good as his teammates. His skill level is right there with them, while also probably being the best defender on the team. So this team is really good, and I'm looking forward to them getting their first top 4 finish at the World Championship. Rise is the new school Turbo Pulsar. I don't mean that he's going to win 4 World Championships in the future or anything like that, but just about all of the things that Turbo does well and helped him to become a Rocket League legend are the exact same things that Rise does well too. Turbo is most known for a solid and consistent playstyle, while always being in exactly the right spot in every scenario. And Rise is the same way, especially on offense. His awareness of the play is unmatched, and he's always lurking on the ground in the perfect spot to take shots off of passes from his teammates, especially in clutch situations, as we saw from all of his game-winning goals throughout this season. Rise had his big breakout performance at the Winter Major, where a lot of people were arguing that he was the star performer for his team with all the clutch goals. Meanwhile, I was arguing that Joyo was the star performer because of all of his crazy mechanical plays that gave Rise an opportunity to score these goals in the first place, and you can't get these types of goals without the setup first. But as the spring split went on and eventually came to a close, I started to get even more appreciation for Rise and what he was doing. Rocket League is a wild esport, where a lot of unpredictable things can happen. Having the consistency and dependability that you get in a player like Rise, who always gets a clean shot from any spot and any angle, gives the team as a whole more stability, and can make both teammates more confident in their passes, which in turn lets them throw better passes. If you know for a fact that your pass is going to turn into a good shot on net, then you're going to do everything in your power to make sure you give that good pass. And that confidence is exactly what Rise provides for Moist offensively. But with that being said, Joyo was still the MVP for a reason. He came into this season as an unknown for a lot of people, and is now solidly among the top players in all of Europe. His background as a freestyler has helped him to hone his mechanics to the point where he can do basically whatever he wants with the ball, whenever he wants. And that creativity is the starting point for so much of Moist offense. This creativity and flair, combined with Rise's ability to always be in the right spot to finish possessions, are key parts of making this team one of, if not the best, team in the world. And Joyo's creativity really paid off in their final game against Team Liquid. At this point in the series, Joyo had gotten multiple assists off of passes coming from the offensive corner. And actually the last 2 clips I showed on screen were examples of these corner passes. So now, with the series coming to a close, and the pressure at its highest, Joyo is once again in a position where he can take the ball to the corner for the pass. Atto is preparing for just that, driving up the back wall to meet him there. But instead, with his first touch, Joyo hits the ball out infield immediately, since there are no defenders there to stop him. He comes off the wall to follow up on that infield touch himself at first, since Rise isn't back in the area yet, and Atto reacts to it pretty quickly, jumping off the wall himself looking to meet Joyo on the ground. Joyo and Atto both use their wave dashes for an extra boost of speed to the ball, but Joyo just barely manages to beat him out for the first touch. This means that Atto's attempt to clear the ball turns into a very unfavorable touch, thanks in large part to a bump from Joyo as well. And now, the only place where Atto can put the ball is exactly where Joyo wants it to go. It goes out to the right, where Rise is now waiting for it after his quick turn back into the play after his boost grab. Rise takes the shot and gets the goal, scoring yet another eventual game winner in a decisive Game 5. But even with all the praise that Joyo and Rise deservedly got for their performance of the majors, there's still a very good argument that Vatira is the best player on this team, and even the entire region. It's indisputable that he's at least the most balanced player. He may have won defensive MVP of the major, but I wouldn't consider him a defensively focused player at all. It just so happens that with Rise spending so much time upfield looking for shots and demos, and Joyo spending so much of his time in the air making mechanical plays, Vatira ends up being the one holding down the fort on defense most often. And while he does play that defense very well, he's far from a one-trick pony. If you need him to take a shot, he can hit it top corner. If you need him to make a pass, he'll send it to where only his guy can get it. And of course, the MVP award says enough about his defense. This team is a true three-headed monster, and they're poised to dominate Europe for a long time. I haven't talked about any North American teams yet, have I? Well, version 1's pretty good, yeah? Yeah, sure, let's talk about them. With every tournament that goes by, both lands and regionals, it's getting harder and harder for me to say that Beast Mode isn't the best player in North America. Overall, it's clear that Beast Mode has established himself to be in the top tier of NA players, alongside the First Killers, Justins, and Atomics of the world, and whoever else you feel like throwing in there. But when the competition goes offline into the LAN setting, he always seems to reach another gear. In his first 2 LANs ever, he's led his team to a top 6 and top 3 finish. And even though his stats in the Spring Major didn't quite meet the ridiculous standard that he set for himself in the Winter Major, he was still a force on both sides of the ball. And he was the starting point for almost every good thing that happened for version 1. With Calm turning into the biggest physical enforcer in the game, and Torment being the strong defensive wall that he always has been, version 1 are a team that needs to be seen as a serious threat to win the World Championship. And let's do one last highlight review before we wrap this one up. After his shot from Torment's pass is just barely saved by Metza, Beast Mode quickly recovers by landing on the wall and then jumping down from the wall to the ground with a wave dash. This quick recovery lets him get to the boost just as it spawns, and he immediately drives up the wall to get his next touch on the ball. For this touch, he jumps off and flips into the ball, which does 2 things for him. 1, it hits the ball straight ahead and into the backboard, so it'll bounce right back to him. And 2, the flip sends him outwards horizontally, killing all of his upward momentum from driving up the wall and keeping him in line with the ball for a second touch. And after flipping to his right, he air rolls his car back to the left while boosting back to the ball. Hitting it with the front of his car and air rolling into the shot gives the ball enough power to go past Relating Wave and into the goal, completing the sweep over endpoint. Also, this is a really dumb detail that doesn't give us any meaningful insight, but this might be the most perfectly timed boost grab of all time. I was watching the replay and saw that the boost pad wasn't visible when Beast Mode drove over it, but he still got 100 boost. So I figured it was the visual bug that affects boost in replays from time to time. But then I went back and looked at it and that wasn't the case at all. Beast Mode grabs this same boost at 144. Then 10 seconds pass and the play comes right back into the same area. Torment drives over the pad right before Beast Mode, but it hasn't spawned for him yet, so he doesn't get it. But then right as Beast Mode drives over it, he gets it. And there's no visual cue on the field for this either, so it probably spawned while he was on top of it. If it had come up even a split second sooner, Torment would have grabbed it. And if it had come up a split second later, Archie was right behind him and he would have grabbed it. But it came up at the exact perfect moment for Beast Mode, and without this boost he wouldn't have been able to score. So this split second difference was really the determining factor in Beast Mode getting the series winning goal. So like I said, it's a pretty dumb detail, and honestly we don't really learn anything from this. But I thought it was cool, so yeah. You want to know what the hardest thing is about making these videos? I never feel like I'm at a good place to finish, because there's always something else to talk about. I could follow up on what I was saying about Carmine Corp in my spring roster moves video, and talk about how bringing in Nali helped them mitigate their spacing issues that would plague them throughout the season, and honestly still does sometimes. Or I could take a closer look at G2 and try to figure out why they got reverse swept twice by teams that they were favored to beat. But the video has to stop somewhere, and I'm choosing to do that here. But if there's any other team or any other player that you want my opinion on, join my Discord. I respond to pretty much every message in there, so if you want to talk to me or get my opinion on something, that's the best place to do it. Plus we're starting to build a little community of Rocket League nerds, so come join us. Plus, it's a good way for me to stay connected with you all if I'm taking a long time to make videos, which happens sometimes. I read one manga about a volleyball team and played through 2 Mass Effect games, and the next thing I know, 2.5 months have gone by and I haven't made a video. My bad, that's on me. But anyways, I'll see you all in the next video, whenever that is. And until then, as always, thanks for watching.